Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are joining us for this edition of Apex Live. Over the next 3 days, I'll be joined by a co-host to bring you the news, interviews, and the latest product introductions from this year's virtual event. Today, I'm delighted to introduce my old friend and colleague, Keith Bryant. Thank you for joining us, Keith. Nice to see you.
Yeah, my pleasure, Trevor.
So, as we all know, that the conference actually started yesterday with the Managers Forum, and there was quite a lot of good debate there. You were involved in the Managers Forum, you took part as well. So let's get some of your takeaways from that. What were the key challenges that you heard of from the Managers Forum?
Well, a lot of it was reaction to COVID, but not only from a negative point of view, from the way that having to deal with COVID had changed the way that people were working. Mm-hmm. You know, words that were used a lot were things like agile, proactive, responsive. You know, a lot of EMS companies changed from their normal business to building ventilators or electronics that's used in patient monitoring and all of these things. I mean, that happened really quickly. I mean, that was not just a US or UK thing. It happened with a lot of companies around the world, and you know, we have to say thank you to all of those guys as a start, because you know, it really has made a it has made a difference to the way that hopefully we start coming out of this.
Right. I picked up on a lot of that as well. I think the communication was key. And you know, trying to keep the supply chains intact by making sure they were over communicating, if anything, to make sure that there was still the supply of materials, raw materials coming through to the factories.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that was talked about not only in the Managers Forum, but in the events later on in the afternoon and in the keynote. Was very much about companies collaborating with other companies who previously had actually been looked on as almost competitors. And, you know, we talk with Industry 4.0 of getting rid of the silo mentality where you keep, you know, everything in together. And, you know, people were starting to work with others. But the thing that I hadn't really picked up on, and I don't know if it's happened very much elsewhere, but was the support that the large OEMs were giving to their supply chain. You know, not necessarily the first tier of supplier, but the supplier to their supplier, who was obviously key to actually, you know, key to the whole thing happening, because, you know, if they went out of business, then, you know, that small part didn't get into the big part and the big part didn't get built.
Right.
And I think that's, you know, that's going to change a lot of people who are looking at just in time, who are looking at lean manufacturing, and they're going to start looking further down the supply chain now.
Right. No, I definitely agree. I think there's definitely a requirement to be able to see inside your supplier's supplier, to get visibility of materials coming through the supply chain, not just take their word for it that you know, they're going to be able to deliver on time. There's also an element of second and third sourcing going on as well, and I think that's been another development as a result of COVID, and partly as a result also of the tail end of the US tariffs with China. Another thing I've noticed as well is the time to market for products is getting shorter. There's a lot of new products coming onto the market with electric vehicles, 5G, all sorts of things. And that's driving a trend towards vertical integration. I noticed, for example, there's a company there, Napratech, recently in California. They were bought out by a private equity company, but the idea is to try and bring in a clean room facility into the EMS factory so that they shorten the supply chain with being able to do advanced packaging and assembly at the same time. And there's quite a few different examples of that happening around the world actually at the moment. So I think supply chain restructuring was another, you know, sort of key topic that was discussed yesterday at the Managers Forum. Any thoughts on that?
Oh, very much. I mean, You know, I asked a couple of the guys who were doing an afternoon presentation whether they thought lean and just-in-time manufacturing and all the other things that we'd done to reduce the number of suppliers and everything else was actually a good thing and or a bad thing given how COVID had hit us.
Mhm.
And the answer was really it was both.
Right.
You know, it meant that you had your, let's say your group of key suppliers that you really had to focus on and you really had to work with. You know, it wasn't a matter of, oh, I can dump guy A and go to guy B. You know, they were really starting to forge these partnerships. And, you know, the other thing I think that we've learned, and, you know, it's especially true of the defense contracting business, is that, you know, people are now doing this wonderful thing called working in parallel. You know, the same way that the guys who developed the vaccines were working to shorten well, effectively the time to market or the time to jab the arm. And now the defense contractors are doing a lot of their work in parallel.
Mhm.
And the risk management teams in some of the bigger players are also looking much further down the line. And, you know, was listening to a couple of the people who were heavily involved in this. And, you know, they were working on, you know, the pandemic risk way back in, you know, the November before last, before everybody was actually worrying about people having it. And, you know, it shows that you know, let's say that the switched on organizations are able to cope with this. And, you know, God forbid something like this happens again.
Right.
But, you know, I think a lot of companies will be in a better position next time because of lessons that they've learned now.
Right, that's very true, and I think they did react to it very quickly. But there's also been some other recent issues with supply chain issues, particularly with fabs. Look at the problems we've had in the automotive industry. Now they're kind of newbies to electronics assembly, some of them, and they're not used to ordering the quantities that they need. But essentially, we're in a situation now where the automotive companies are competing with the consumer manufacturers of consumer products for chips, which is not an ideal situation.
No, I mean, the story as I heard it was when this started to kick in, everybody thought, well, nobody's going to be buying anything which is automotive in the near future because everybody's going to be stuck at home.
Mhm.
So they switched their manufacturing over to computers, smartphones, all the things that people were starting to order well and above what was expected because of the working at home or the communicating with the office or whatever they needed to do. And, you know, as we all know, once you restructure a fab, it takes a while to get it back again. Plus the fact, you know, for a while now, they've been working flat out to take care of what the consumers have needed, you know, with people moving house and buying new televisions or upgrading the television or, you know, getting every kid a laptop. All of these things have, you know, they've helped certain parts of the industry because, you know, they're going absolutely gangbusters. But, you know, unfortunately, there's a finite amount of work that the fabs can do, and if they're doing A, they're not doing B.
That's true. That's true. Yeah. I mean, it kind of wonders whether there's definitely a requirement for new fab investment in the West, in likes of the United States, and certainly in Europe. I mean, Europe. In fact, one of the news items coming up shortly is, of course, that the Bosch fab came online yesterday and started producing wafers.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of let's say building before manufacturing happening in Asia also, especially with the China-US thing, where a lot of people are looking to move manufacturing outside of China, and you've got India looking to invest to become a major player in fabrication as well. So yeah,
You really think India's going to, emerge as a big supplier to the rest of the world? Because I mean, they don't have the infrastructure.
Yeah, until the last couple of years, I spent a lot of time over there. And, you know, the stories that you heard from some people were woeful. But if you look at now the number of smartphones that India is producing, for its own use and also for export, it's starting to wake up to the fact of what it needs. So yeah, I think, given the time it takes to put a wafer fab plant up and equip it and get it started, I think, the infrastructure is going to happen, to use one of the buzz phrases, in parallel.
Right, right. Well, that would be interesting to see. But I think what we'll hear a little bit about it shortly. But I think one of the key areas that has benefited from this outsourcing has been Mexico. Mexico, Thailand, Vietnam, these sorts of areas have all benefited quite a bit in the last 2 years, really.
Oh, hugely. I mean, before the pandemic hit, I mean, all three of those areas were, very busy with new factories, new equipment, training people. Everything was running really well. I mean, Mexico has a bit of a head start in a lot of ways, but Thailand's a close second, and Vietnam is coming up really, really fast now.
Right. So anyway, John Mitchell made his keynote speech yesterday. Keith, you sat through all of John's keynote. What were your takeaways?
A lot of interesting stuff. I mean, he brought in a lot of people from his senior IPC team, and it was interesting to hear about how they're approaching legislation now with the advent of COVID, and obviously the new team at the top of the US, and the fact that they were saying that they think, from what they're seeing already, things are starting to work a lot in a lot more of a friendly fashion, which is good for everybody and good for the industry. But they are lobbying heavily to do a lot of stuff within the US. And there was also a short segment from the lady who looks after the IPC, let's say, regulatory interests in Europe. And there's also a lot of stuff moving in Brussels as well, which is hopefully gonna help the industry going forwards.
It's great to see they've got a seat at the table now in Brussels.
Yeah.
Which is good. They're getting ahead of the legislation rather than having to inherit it.
Yeah, and it's much easier to, as you say, it's much easier to change it at the beginning than it is once it's cast in stone.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay.
The big.
So anyway, I think it's time that we're going to go and join John's interview. He's coming up after the break. John Mitchell with his keynote. My interview with John after his keynote, should I say. It seems like it was just a year ago when we were sitting across from each other at APEX with a pandemic raging in China. What have you learned in the past 12 months as a result of COVID?
Well, so much. First, I think we all imagined that our supply chains were fairly complex, but we really had no real visceral experience with how complex our supply chains really were and how integrated they were. So that's probably been the chief thing that I think that we've learned as an industry out of the pandemic, is just how intricate our supply chains are. And as we have learned that, we've been striving to overcome any of those challenges that supply that you've come to rely on and that was always available when you needed it suddenly wasn't. And so I think the industry has adapted very well to that, but it did present a number of
they're very fragile. I mean, especially back in the beginning when everybody was relying on just in time for materials coming from Asia. And of course, when these materials get interrupted because of the problems they were having with COVID, that really started to, send a cascading shockwave across the industry.
Yeah, I know. I remember last year when we spoke, China was experiencing COVID, but really the rest of the world was not so much. And we were talking about how that might impact the design of certain products that, people couldn't go to China to help do that design. Well, that just got multiplied across the globe. So yeah, it was it's been a challenging year, I think, for much of the industry. But at the same time, I feel like the electronics industry really has been the bright spot. We've come to the rescue, and so that just makes me feel really proud to be part of this industry. To say, hey, we helped solve this, moving solutions forward.
Yeah, we definitely did. We certainly stepped up when it came to respiratory systems and all these sorts of things. So how is the to COVID?
Yeah, I think a lot of the industry has talked about being, having Industry 4.0, or as we like to term it, the factory of the future. And there may have been pieces of that, but this pandemic really forced a great realization that there's much more involved in truly having, in terms of having remote access to people, having your customers being able to walk through your factory without ever going in your factory, and building a lot more of that intelligence. So I believe a lot of investment has taken place also, and will continue to take place to really truly get closer to that factory of the future. And another big piece of this that has, I think, brought a lot of awareness is that there are two big challenges that the world faces. One is workforce. We're really trying to we've already have a workforce shortage, and as we bring more and more new technologies into the factory, that pressure is going to get exacerbated. So we need skills training programs, and IPC has been working to develop those kinds of programs so that we can have a very nimble workforce, that when there's a job that you never imagined needs to be done, they have the base skills that they can then grow and be able to do that job. And the other area that I would bring up would probably be on the environmental side. We just, in my keynote that we just finished, announced the launch of our ESG for electronics, environmental, social, and governance, and trying to be a morally responsible, more morally responsible company as you develop your electronics products. The fortunate thing about that is when I've talked to various owners and manufacturers, they're on this already. So this is just going to help them highlight all the good work they have been doing and building over the last few years.
But I guess you could probably expect a bit more environmental legislation coming in with this new Biden administration anyway.
Well, yeah, I think with the Biden administration, but the European, circular economy efforts are strong. And so, we as electronics manufacturers tend to develop things for one world. Nobody wants to build a product that's only good in one region. And so when you have strong legislation that has any aspect to it, whether it's a UL rating or a EU regulation or something like that, we tend to, like ROS or REACH, we tend to build our products to meet all of them, and so we can sell them anywhere.
Right. So, the supply chains, as we talked about earlier, took a beating, from the lack of visibility to shipping restrictions and even more recently the fab shortages for the automotive industry. How can we make these things better?
So that's a big challenge, isn't it? I mean, the better we can be at predicting what our needs are going to be, I think those challenges will be, the people can then build up the capacity that they need to meet those needs. The real challenge, especially on the chip side, is, historically, and our chief economist, Sean Duberback, talks about this a lot. Historically, when there's been a dip in the economy or a recession, tactile goods have typically dropped and so when we hit that recession a little over, or not quite a year ago, around the April timeframe, manufacturers did what they should do based on historical. They kind of backed off and they refocused their fabs in the chips fabs to develop chips for the things that were selling. So you don't expect more expensive goods like cars to be selling. So they shifted efforts to go more toward the electronics market because that was selling like gangbusters, or toward the medical area. And then when the automotive side just did a sharp jump back, it kind of caught everybody unaware, and you can't just turn, there's like an 11-week turnaround for a fab on the silicon side. So that it just caused a lot of delays and angst that people were doing the right thing based on history, and so the way to overcome it is to really try to do a better job of projecting out what your needs will be, and then not living on the just in time. That's kind of been our business has been shifting that direction. I think you'll see a little bit of shift back from that in terms of, hey, we only have enough supply to last 2 days. Well, that's good, but not so good. It depends on what situation.
Absolutely, yeah, because we've got this sad situation, which we've now got the automotive guys competing with the consumer people for chips. So it's not a great situation. Although, admittedly, the Bosch factory came online today and started producing wafers for the first time in Berlin. So there's certainly some light there in Europe. Do you think we're needing more capacity in the United States?
I'm sorry, more capacity in the United
States?
States?
In terms of fab capacity?
Yeah, I think there is an effort to build that. I think you're going to find, because of the pandemic, I think you're going to find more regional capacity desire. So in Europe, in North America, in Asia, you're going to want to make sure that wherever you're building goods, you have a local supply option. It may not be your first choice, but you always have a backup there.
Now, all countries are going to be looking for ways to kickstart their economies coming out of COVID. Does IPC play a role in trying to persuade governments to pass manufacturing incentives?
Sure. We have a strong advocacy effort in DC as well as in Brussels, really working to try to work with policymakers and make sure that the voice of the industry is heard, so that they can, the thing that gets most scary is when you get a policy that is constructed devoid of information from the industry. And so we try to make sure that we're bringing electronics manufacturers to the forefront of that conversation. And fortunately, we're getting good reception. There is a desire by those who are writing policies to listen to those who are building them and try to overcome their challenges, but also as they try to move things in a direction that they would like to go, for instance, on this ESG front, they're listening so that you don't cripple an industry while you're trying to do that.
Right, excellent. Okay, yeah, it was an interesting one that I brought up with Chris earlier today, which was that they just passed legislation here in the UK last week to give manufacturers 130% write-off against all capital equipment sales, which...
Those kinds of opportunities are very exciting. And the other thing is, industrial policy just needs to be clear. And I think that's one thing that we've been pushing on various administrations to try to help move the, kickstarting the economy again.
So another threat that appears to be a wider threat than we first thought it was is security. We were wrestling with it within IPC from the counterfeit side of it, but it tends to be a lot more nefarious than that, and getting into products that we use on an everyday basis, consumer products. How big an issue is this, and how is it going to play in a digital world going forward?
Yeah, you've hit on it right there, Trevor. As we become more and more digital, this becomes a more and more important issue. And so a lot of our efforts on the Factory of the Future, we have an entire section there that is working on standardization and incorporating security measures into those standards. We have some other trusted supplier security standards already that exist, like the 1791 that is largely used by the U.S. military and those that supply it. So, but it's not just a cybersecurity, if you will. There's also the human aspect of security as well. And so these standards are dealing with all of that. And it's truly a global effort. Some of our board members from Japan actually have been helping lead the way in this for the last year.
Excellent. Or so. Yeah, it's a huge area. And I mean, one of the scary things was, of course, that the recent Roomba situation was a security issue with the LiDAR sensors. Apparently, that was how they managed to get into the system. Which is really quite scary. So final question, John. I mean, how do you think things are going to pan out this week for IPC with your virtual conference? I mean, obviously we would all prefer to be there in person, of course.
So, you know, I find myself moving from virtual meeting to virtual meeting and missing the, you know, the eye contact, the, you know, the shaking of the hands, et cetera, that we normally have, and just seeing everybody's bright and smiling faces. But on the other hand, there are some advantages of doing it this way. So there are a lot of people who, you know, due to travel budgetary restrictions in the past, have never been able to attend an Apex Expo. And this year, we're able to get a lot of people able to watch it virtually. Plus, we've had the ability with certain packages to allow you to have access to it through June 13th. So with that advantage, you know, typically if you're at the show, often if you were just you know, really going at it, you might be able to catch, you know, 3 to 5 sessions a day for, you know, 3 days or so. This way you can get over 100 sessions and have access to it over 90 days. So we feel very positive that it'll be a positive thing, and we're looking forward to some of the survey information coming back to find out whether we should continue offering a virtual portion of Apex going forward as well.
I think it very much will be a hybrid, whatever way these things come back, for sure. But I mean, have you been able to, for example, attract a much wider audience geographically to come and attend the event virtually?
Yeah, geographically, I think it's about the same. It feels fairly similar because we've always had a decent international presence at Apex that we hold in the U.S. But I just have found that it seems like it's deeper into the companies. So a lot of the same companies are coming, but there's different people that are able to join that typically would not have been.
Great. Well, we're looking forward to an exciting week. We've got lots of guests lined up and things to do, so we're certainly looking forward to it, and we wish you best of luck and every success for the rest of the week, and thank you for joining us today.
Very good. Thanks, Trevor. Have a great day.
I'm delighted to be joined by Chris Nash, who's the Senior Product Manager at Indium Corporation. Welcome, Chris. Nice to see you today.
Nice to see you, Trevor.
Yeah. So we're one of the products that you're showing virtually at the event, or you wanted to talk about, is your Durafuse product. That's your low temperature solder. Tell us a little bit about that, and what's the melting temperature range of Durafuse at the moment?
Sure. So, you know, I think Durafuse LT is one of the coolest products on the market right now. Its patented technology is a low melting point alloy solution that's going to provide drop shock performance equal to or better than Stack 305, which is unprecedented for a low temp solder. The melting point or the reflow, I should say, of the alloy system, we like to keep it below 210 degrees C. So it's somewhere between 200 and 210 degrees C. But that optimization of the reflow process is going to be key for increasing and outperforming the SAC 305 alloy from a drop shock performance standpoint.
Right. So I'm guessing the reason that it's performing so well in the drop shock is because it doesn't have bismuth in the alloy. Am I correct?
That's correct. That's correct. Bismuth by nature is very brittle. So we want to do everything that we can to eliminate bismuth for applications that require drop shock performance. Now, obviously, all applications aren't going to require drop shock performance. For instance, TVs, servers, that kind of thing, where they're just going to sit in a room. They're never going to be dropped. If they are dropped, you're most likely going to fracture the screen on a TV, for instance. So the bismuth alloys can be used in those instances, but when you're talking about, say, mobile devices or tablets or PCs. They, even PCs get dropped every now and then. Laptops. I can't recall the amount of times I've dropped my laptop while traveling somewhere. So it's important to have the drop shock capabilities with any of those types of handheld devices.
So what's in it? If it doesn't have bismuth, what is the composition of it?
Right. So it's a proprietary blend of primarily a low temp indium tin silver contained material, and then a SAC material, and they're mixed together to create this new proprietary alloy solution.
Okay. Keith, have you got a couple of questions on it?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I've been involved in a lot recently is the inert or notness of the flux once it's been through reflow or hand soldering or whatever, because everybody's worried now about Roche tests and all the other stuff. So what's the situation with regards to the residue?
Sure. So low temperature makes the residue reliability important. It's something that's a little more tricky and a little more difficult with low temperature. But we design our materials, our flux residues, to be completely benign after reflow. They pass the standard G-standard SIR testing, the Belcor SIR testing, some of the enhanced SIR testing that the industry is talking about, especially in the automotive realm, where tighter, your voltage is higher. So it's important that we're considering all of that into the design of the materials and the design of the flux and the residue left behind. So with a no-clean material, it is truly a no-clean material. You don't have to worry about the electrical reliability of the flux residue after reflow.
Right.
Oh, that's certainly good news. And what about testability?
Testability is always a challenge with a no-clean flux residue. I think, that's more, we see that more with SAC materials. As OSP coatings on boards become more prevalent, I think people are used to leaving, say, an immersion tin or immersion silver or ENIG board unpasted. Now with OSP, you have to paste over the copper OSP. There are some probe technologies out there that say that they can penetrate the OSP, but most times our customers are forced into pasting over. That makes the penetration of the flux residue important to make intimate contact with the solder underneath the flux residue. Now we've designed a number of flux residues to be penetrable by the ICT pin. And usually they're either a soft material, a soft flux residue after reflow, or they are a fast break, fairly brittle type flux residue after reflow. So there's a few different ways to go. The low temp actually makes it a little bit easier because you're not baking the residue and polymerizing the residue as much as you would with a SAC alloy. So, it's all really going to depend on the ICT process that's being implemented and being employed at our customer. We can certainly help provide guidance into what might work a little bit best for the application at hand.
Right, that's great. So do you think LTS solders or low temperature solders are going to increase by the number of applications going forward?
I think so. I think we're seeing a kind of a technology inflection point where people are looking at low temp solders for a number of reasons. Temperatures, they have temperature constraints on components, or the PET or flexible substrates that they're using can't go to the 250, 260 degrees C range. I think you have some soldering applications where our builds are becoming three-dimensional and energy costs. although I really haven't seen a study in the industry to say that that's in fact the case. I think that would be a fairly complex study, and it would depend on the energy cost wherever you are. But I really do think that the industry is moving more and more towards low temperature for a number of reasons. It is becoming more prevalent, more important. And Indium Corporation has been involved with low temperature for probably since the entire history of Indium Corporation, starting in 1934.
Right.
Our Indoy #1 is a low temperature indium container.
Yeah.
So we're very familiar with the space.
Yeah, I certainly think if you're not driving your reflow oven as hard, you're bound to be saving energy, somewhere down the line in electricity costs, etc. But anyway, we need to move on because you've got another product we want to talk about, and that's the CW232, a flux cored wire, which you've specifically designed for robotic soldering and laser soldering, that kind of thing. Tell us a bit about that.
Sure. So robotic soldering is becoming more prevalent as well. Whether it's for interconnects of connectors in a secondary process, or if it's for an entire board. Instead of hand soldering, robotic soldering is going to be much more beneficial and reliable, and give you the best results possible. Whereas a hand soldering operation, one operator might result in different process techniques than another. So the 232 is really designed for the robotic soldering applications. It's a very, very fast wetting material, the flux core, which allows for fast wetting to the pins so that you can increase the throughput of your process. It also will leave low spatter, which is extremely important from a cosmetic standpoint, but also a electrical reliability standpoint, because you don't want flux going onto gold fingers of the board where you're going to plug it into, say, a motherboard. You really need to be careful with the flux spattering. Now, on the hand soldering side of things, flux spattering is important because the operators tend to get little burns on their hands. So it's important for a safety reason to have a low spattering option as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay. How do you manage to reduce the spatter using this?
Well, it's really all in the formulation, right? So it's a proprietary mix of chemicals to create the flux core that we would put inside of the wire itself. It's really unique. There aren't a lot of solder companies that are really aimed at lowering spatter. A lot of people are content with their solder wire formulas, speaking from a competitive standpoint. In Indium Corporation, we're really looking at moving the industry ahead with new materials all the time, new products, bringing them to market and making the industry better as a whole.
So not a lot of margin in the core wire business, so I wouldn't imagine there's a lot of appetite for investing too much R&D dollars into it.
Yeah, that's correct. I would say it's a fairly low margin product, but at the same time, you still have new challenging processes like robotic soldering that are going to need a new product to work properly. It's still important that we're focused on all aspects of the solder industry and investing in the solder industry and our product development so that our customers can benefit. The same goes for wave flux. I think a lot of times wave flux is, 15, 16 years ago when I started in the industry, everyone said that wave flux was going to disappear. Well, it's still here. Selective soldering is still here. Wave flux is still here. We're still aimed at improving our flux chemistries for wave flux and selective solder. So there's a number of materials that we've brought to market recently, and they're really fantastic for helping out with some of the new challenges that the industry is facing.
Keith, have you got any input on this flux cord wire, the CW232?
No, I think, Trevor, my only comment is it's nice to hear a company with a holistic approach to the whole of let's say, the various processes that are used within the industry, rather than, just going after the,
Low-hanging fruit.
the high return stuff. So yeah, it's good to hear that people are still working on cord wire and wave soldering flux and all those things that through our lifetimes we've heard many times they're going to die.
I think you're right. I think the solder paste is still a primary focus for Indium Corporation. Don't get me wrong there. We have a number of new materials and tried and true materials that the industry is currently using. 8.9 HF, for instance, where it really can't beat it. It's one of the best solder pastes on the market, if not the best. It's kind of the new 92J, if people remember the 92J from the tin lead days. So,
oh yeah,
8.9 HF has been a very successful product for us and will continue to be because it was really developed ahead of its time, we believe.
Right. Well, great. Well, thank you, Chris, for coming in and telling us about both these products today. We wish you every success with it, and we hope you have a good rest of the show at Apex.
Okay, Trevor, thank you very much. Keith, thank you again.
Our pleasure.
How low can you go?
Low temperature solders enable manufacturers to lower reflow profiles, improve quality, and reduce operating costs. Abstracts are invited from leading researchers, industrialists, chemists, and metallurgists. LTS 2021, June 16th. Click below for more details and to submit your abstract.
Yeah, no.
Okay, and welcome back. So, Keith, I mean, it's absolutely true that the wave soldering market and the cord wire market has commoditized quite a bit. So it's nice to see companies actually investing or putting some investment dollars into continuously developing that end of the industry. I'm just wondering how much of it's driven by their desire to come out with new products, or whether it's actually been driven by customer demand for new products in that area.
Well, customer demand for everything on a production line is, faster, cleaner, cheaper, with less faults. So yeah, I suppose you could say that pretty much everything that we touch and everything that we see is customer driven.
Right.
But what I like about some of the larger, let's call them solder companies, is that they're still a one-stop shop. You can get pretty much everything from the bar to the paste from the same place. So if there's a problem, you only have one point of contact to help you with it. Or if you want to improve your process or all of those things, you don't have to talk with 5 different distributors and 6 different principals or whatever, and again, this goes back to the stuff that we were saying earlier, about, people are looking at a smart factory, but it's also the supplies that you bring into that factory have also got to be smart.
Right.
So, if you can work with a reactive company who are continually developing new technology to overcome the challenges of the industry, then, probably, dare I say it, you probably don't mind paying a couple of bucks more for some stuff to actually have that support. As an industry, we went through a phase, well, quite a while ago now, where everything had to be cheaper and cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. And, every annual negotiation was, how much money can you knock off this bill? And, I think, people are looking at a more holistic approach now, to use an overused word. And I think they're looking, more at the bigger picture.
Right.
And, I think that helps the whole industry.
Yeah, no, I agree. But it also kind of plays into this topic I was talking about earlier of vertical integration. I think it's more important, especially for chemistry companies and materials companies, to become more vertically integrated to be able to offer the total solution. And a good example of that was the announcement yesterday of DuPont making the acquisition of Laird Chemicals, Laird Performance Chemistry, should I say. That's another way for them to sort of vertically integrate and bring in some of the thermal management materials that are made by Laird into the DuPont portfolio. But then it gives the manufacturer, at the end of the day, it gives you a one-stop shop where you can go for your process solutions, and instead of having 2 or 3 different suppliers.
Yeah, I noticed you didn't mention the $2.3 billion that was the purchase price, Trevor.
No, I didn't. What would you call it? But it's true. It was quite a hefty bill, wasn't it?
Yeah.
But it's certainly synonymous with what's going on in the industry. In fact, we had a couple of other announcements out there over the last 24 hours. I mean, LED division to Smart Global Holdings. Now, that deal was much smaller. It was only $300 million, but it means that Smart will now Cree-brand into its portfolio. And what that will do is it'll free Cree up to concentrate on its entry into the materials market with the new branding, the company Wolfspeed, and they're going to concentrate on their silicon carbide and gallium nitride solutions, which they're developing for EV and 5G applications. So seeing the integration, getting into the materials market, I think being able to understand materials and how material sets work together going forward is going to be a much bigger component of the industry going forward.
Yeah, I mean, I can understand why Cree made the strategic sale, and it gives them funding to invest in the development of the things that they're doing. But I mean, I'd have said 300 million was quite cheap.
Yeah, I was quite shocked at the price tag on it, but I guess LEDs are cheap. But they had a huge footprint in that business, so it does seem a very low price tag.
Yeah, it certainly does.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
so there's another announcement which I think you can tell us about from Bosch.
Yeah, right in the middle of the pandemic and all of the difficult times, they've managed to build 300 millimeter fab wafer facility in Germany, and they actually opened it yesterday. It's aimed predominantly for automotive microchips for the EV market. Mm-hmm. And they say it's going to be fully online by the end of the year.
Wow.
So obviously with a lot of companies, the pandemic hasn't changed their appetite. I also read somewhere else that Bosch are offering their employees the ability to work from home for 2 days a week long term.
Wow. Well, I think that's a trend that's going to continue across most industries. If you can work from home, then you will have that option. I mean, I think companies have found that people are quite productive when they are at home. For the most part, I think they still need that interaction in the office from time to time. You still need at least a once weekly meeting, etc. But there's definitely going to be a hybrid model going forward.
Yeah, like there will be for lots of things in our industry, I think.
Including this. I mean,
yeah.
Look at trade shows. I mean, we haven't been able to do physical trade shows. This is obviously we're live at the moment, and we're going to be taking a look into some people's demonstration rooms and factories later on during the course of the next 3 days. But it's this is a completely new way of working, and I think when we get back to the physical trade shows, there's going to be a hybrid model there too. I think we'll still be doing this as well as going to physically visit the trade show.
Yeah, I'm on 1 or 2 technical committees for a couple of the major shows, and I mean even stuff that's happening in November, where I was hoping, got to be honest, I was hoping it was going to be a completely physical exhibition and a conference.
Yeah.
But you know, a lot of the people are saying, you know, it still needs to be a hybrid. You know, maybe we run the event live and then 3 or 4 days later put everything up on the virtual world so people can download it, and the speakers have the option of either standing in front of a probably slightly reduced audience or just sending in the presentation file.
Yeah, I think there's going to be different models for that, and I'm on the same committee as you're referring to. But I think there'll also be a requirement to do it live from the event itself, from the show floor, as it were. But one of the issues there, of course, especially in the United States, is where you've got unionized convention centers, is that the cost of being able to do that is quite prohibitive. But you know, that's just one of the things that are going to have to be overcome. So anyway, getting back to finish off on the topics that you picked up on with John Mitchell's keynote address this morning. What else did you pick up on that seems to be a key aspect?
He did a short segment with Matt Kelly, and that was for me really interesting. They're talking about this Factory of the Future project,
right?
And you know, from listening to some of the other speakers in the management session later in the day, I think they should change the name to Factory for the Future, because I think we can't look at something that's out there. We've got to be starting to work on it today.
Right.
But no, you know, they're doing a lot of work with upskilling, with getting let's say CFX into a larger part of the system. Guys that we spoke that spoke later in the day were talking about, you know, having a quotation model which has the ability to effectively absorb a bill of materials and break it out, and then get pricing from Farnell's or whoever's for all of the component parts, and put it all together very quickly and autonomously. So
interesting. I mean, because there's already a couple of companies doing that.
Yeah.
I mean, in fact, they're one of the biggest growers or the biggest growth companies in during COVID. That's these companies that are doing virtual, pricing. You know that you can put a BOM list in, and it'll tell you if the materials are available, if there's a risk of the materials not being available, and what the real-time price is.
And for me, the real takeaway from a lot of the stuff that I heard yesterday, and you know, when we started talking about CFX, it was machines communicating with each other, allowing data to flow between machines to maybe a central hub, getting rid of a few of the silos, and more importantly, getting rid of the silo mentality. Right. And I mean, I can remember lots of conversations in the early days where people said, oh, you know, machine vendor A is never going to let his machine talk to machine vendor B, because if one's a printer and one's an AOI, all the AOI machine is going to do is make the printer look bad. Right. So we're not going to accept that. And, you know, thankfully, we've moved miles and miles past that now. And, you know, CFX is becoming, you know, to use the computer parlance, it's becoming a higher level language now. And it's starting to incorporate a whole load of things. And, you know, some people you talk to say, you know, Industry 4.0, artificial intelligence, automated manufacturing is going to get rid of 40% of the jobs in the industry. One of the guys that I heard yesterday said it's going to add 1 million new jobs.
Right.
And most of the people doing those jobs are already employed doing something else.
Right.
Because you need to have that mix of ability to analyze the data, but also to be able to fix the problem when you've analyzed the data to find out what the problem is.
Right.
And I think that's something that, you know, Matt Kelly was talking about and a few of the other guys. And, you know, it's kind of been missed out of the equation. You know, a lot of people are worried about change. And as soon as they see, you know, machines are going to talk to each other, we don't need people to do this and we don't need people to do that. What we need is a whole load of people to do stuff, you know, they were talking about a whole load of job names that don't exist at the moment. And, you know, you've seen a few yourselves, like Chief Information Officer and, you know, Data Collection Manager and Processing Manager and a whole load of stuff. So, you know, people need to be reskilled and upskilled.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's absolutely what's going to happen. And I mean, when I look back, gosh, maybe 12 years at least now, when I went to the first sort of leading edge factory of the future in Germany, that factory had started its journey, believe it or not, 8 years previously. And it had 8 years further on, it had the exact same number of people still working there. They hadn't lost one employee. They had redirected employees, and their output was up enormously. They were producing a lot more product, but they had not dropped one employee. They said exactly the same. So I totally agree with you. I think it's not going to be a job killer. It's going to be a job maker, if anything.
Yeah, we just hope that the young people are going to come in and want to do the jobs if they're a little bit more computerish and exciting.
True. Yeah, there's going to be certainly you're going to have more data skills to be able to deal with this going forward, for sure. Talking about some of the new things that have been out there, we have been looking at some of these new products on our Tech Talk Thursday programs every week, and there's a couple of them recently that have been absolutely outstanding. One of them that springs to mind is the Novacentrix machine, but another one was from ASUS. The ASUS has a conference they hold every November called ASUS Technology Days, and generally at that event they roll out all sorts of new technologies, and they bring in some speakers who talk about things that are outside the industry, even just to sort of you know, put a really wide holistic view on it. The big news I saw at this year's Technology Days was the Serio 6000 printer. This new printer works autonomously and basically uses an AGV to load up the stencil, and the stencil then gets automatically loaded into the machine, and it also has an automatic changeover for the stencil cleaner and the paste cartridges. So in other words, it can work 2 to 3 shifts without any sort of human interaction at all. It really was a very interesting program, and we've got an excerpt coming up for you now on the ASUS Serio 6000. Let's take a look. Welcome to Tech Talk Thursday, Season 3, Episode 1. You may recall at the end of Season 2, I did a roundup of all the technologies that we had seen over 2020. Among those was the launch of the Serio 6000 printer by ASUS at the ASUS Technology Days. I'm delighted to say that I have the product manager for the Serio 6000 joining us today, Torsten Wegeland. Welcome, Torsten. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning. Welcome, Douglas. Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah. So I was really excited to see the presentation that you gave at the Technology Days. It looks a superb piece of equipment. And tell us a little bit about the development of the Serio 6000. Was it developed as a concept machine or to meet a specific customer request?
I mean, it's a long story, and I hope we've got enough time. Actually,
give us a reduced version.
It's a long time ago. We already started with smart features that make the life of our operators easier. And we always have to keep in mind customers asking about having people only on the machine working if they are required. And this was more than 4 years ago, the actual start to say, what can we make better? And if you look backwards, and you've been with us all the time, we started with IPEX systems for dispensing. We have done the modular camera unit, so you can quick inter-exchange components in between machines. You can put on grippers, for instance, for a pin placement system. And this was one big step towards this, let me call it, more automated, integrated machine, to say, okay, what is needed, what is time consuming. And this was the intention far in the 2018s. We started with this development, and bits and pieces came to that with predictive paste measurement for reloading paste on the stencil, etc. But in the end, customers still said, we want less involvement of operators. And our biggest problem is that the operator needs to be exactly on the machine when we need to do a changeover, which is, I guess, the biggest task, or the most critical task on the operation of a line. And this was the thinking to say, okay, what can we do for the future? And there we started to analyze how the line is working, what needs to be done if you have an order change, if you do a new setup, if you have a continuous run, big orders or small orders. Then we really made like a matrix and figured out, okay, the stencil change, paste change, or squeegee and stencil and stuff like that. And from there, we started. Yeah. We started in the 18s. And yes, to say, actually, it is in customer demand, but no one really said, do it like this. They just said, give us something better.
Right. Yeah, well, it's certainly an interesting development. I think if you put this together with, say, the Fuji NXTR, you've essentially got potentially the beginnings of a lights out factory, or a lights out line at least there. So what functions are performed automatically, and what's the takt time of the stencil changeover?
Right, let's look to probably the takt times. If we look today on the machines, depend on the changeover time, yes, but we are not the bottleneck in the printing process. Normally not. There are other components in the line which are slowing everything down. So the focus was that we have changeovers compatible to today. If you look, let's start, if we run through the last board and then we know it was the last board we need to do a changeover. Today, you call in your operator, or you have a pulse system today, the operator maybe is on site, and then he starts doing a changeover, and he needs about 2-3 minutes, depending how smart he is, how fast he is. Now, with the automatic machine, we know the last board has been delivered, and now APS starts to take the pins away automatically. We can start to swing up our stencil loader. We put the old stencil and the old squeegee in. We take the new one out, and we can do this in a compatible time frame what we have today if an operator is doing it. Okay. Now, this could be faster, but there are still some limitations. So we spoke about the stencil loader, which swings up, and we could swing it up much faster, but there are regulations and requirements that you should not exceed a certain millimeter per second velocity, just in case something happened. And we are still limited that you have these limitations. Mm-hmm. Now, you said in another sentence before, lights out manufacturing. Mm-hmm. If there would be no human around, no one you could maybe in some circumstances harm, then you could definitely also move faster.
Yes.
There are limitations.